Yeah, I wanted to ask you about some comments that I saw in a column by Judith February. In it, she talks about the sort of discontent and the plights, as you would describe them, of ordinary people, people who are struggling to make ends meet, people who are heading onto the streets to protest, maybe over ward councillor nominations, about the upcoming elections, about service delivery. And she says we must draw a line, and that people are particularly sort of likely to head out into the streets because there's so much discontent and so much anger. Is that not then an argument for a very sober-minded and a very sort of careful media in terms of inciting violence? Because the argument that Hlaudi Motsoeneng uses, and the one he mentioned in that press conference on Tuesday, is that people will call the press and then play to the cameras. And he doesn't want to allow journalists to collude, was the word he used, with community members.
Look, violence is something that has to be dealt with in a sensitive manner in the media, okay? But we have a press council, we have press regulations, the Broadcasting Complaints Commission, codes of conduct that broadcasters are supposed to follow. And this is about dealing sensitively with violence, right? You have to weigh up things like dignity of victims and that sort of thing with the public interest. Generally, our media is very sensitive to violence. The reality is we live in a violent country. There's a lot of ugliness. But when violence is portrayed, it's done so after, generally speaking, I think this is true of most media outlets, it's done so after serious consideration is given to things like the public interest. And, so if you look at, for instance, how xenophobic violence was portrayed in the media, sometimes there were some very graphic images, but it's not like these images are just being used to sell publications. This is not, crude tabloid journalism. For the most part, violence is dealt with in a careful and cautious manner, and the media can be held to account for using gratuitous violence to sell publications and that sort of thing. Now, yes, you may get the occasional youth at a protest grandstanding in front of the cameras when you're wanting to be on TV, but this is not really what violent protests are about in this country. And we're a protest capital of the world. Violent protests all the time. And to have a blanket ban on covering violence and protests is just censorship. There's nothing sensitive about it. There's nothing there about, about a cautious, a careful depiction of violence. It's sweeping. It's Hlaudi saying we don't want to cover any violence. We want to turn the cameras away when there's any sort of violence, even if that violence is in response to police brutality. I mean, what would have happened if the cameras were turned away at Marikana? So this we cannot accept. This is blanket censorship. It's sweeping. It's far too heavy-handed. And there's obviously a political agenda behind this. This is about protecting leading political figures. It's about protecting a factional elite from the embarrassing realities of South Africa today, and that they are very complicit in.
I suppose the difficulty there is, where is the proof? Where are the documents and the phone calls that give empirical evidence that is in fact the case?
I mean, I think the proof is Hlaudi Motsoeneng has a very sort of ham-fisted leadership style. I think the proof is in some of the things he said. That journalists need to be more patriotic. That we should have 70% good news. He makes some, to be frank, idiotic claims with quite staggering regularity, and I think there's nothing subtle about the man. He's not tried to hide his agenda, it would seem. So all you have to do is look at some of these wild claims made by him. But beyond that, I mean, take a step back and look at the bigger picture. Look at how this ties up with. I mean, we can draw some very direct links with a faction of the ANC. And their control of editorial content. So amendments to the broadcasting bill, amendments to the editorial policy and broadcasting bill, the editorial policy and the memorandum of incorporation. All of these things serve to give the Department of Communications and the state direct control over editorial content through the COO, through the executive of the SABC. I mean, there's very clear machinations at work here. it doesn't really need to be spelled out by Faith Muthambi for us to be able to see what's going on.